How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on Wednesday, August 14th, to go over some more NFL storylines going into the second half of the week now, getting closer to the second preseason game now, with a couple games tomorrow and then continuing on to the weekend. But that's not the biggest thing on today's schedule. The biggest thing, some devastating news for the Minnesota Vikings, as their rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy was diagnosed with a torn meniscus. He went through surgery today, and he will miss the entire 2024 season, which is unfortunate. We're going to go into that and the deciding factors and what this means for the Vikings going forward. And also, in the first part of the show, we're going to talk also about a question that popped into my head with all this wide receiver talk, and I saw Matt LaFleur's comments recently on their group of wide receivers, and it made me think of the question of whether or not the wide receiver position is starting to become a little bit overvalued in some cases. Similar to quarterbacks and how much they're getting paid, are the wide receivers now trending in the same direction? I'm going to get into that and my feelings around all of that, as well as getting to Matt LaFleur's comments on his wide receiver group as well. But we have more topics to get to as the show goes on, so make sure to stick around for those. But before I get started on the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you've got a question during the show, we want to hear about it. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to go about that. Use the Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But if you do prefer an alternative to the Super Chat button, you also still have the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, to use that link and leave a comment or question there if you prefer that way. But as always, we couldn't do this without your amazing support, and we're always so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. So make sure to hit the Super Chat button if you have any question or comment during today's show. But with that out of the way now, the biggest news of today, just breaking today a little bit earlier this afternoon, J.J. McCarthy out for the entire 2024 season. It's pretty devastating. I was pretty, disappointed by it, just because I came on here at the start of this week to talk about, the rookies that really impressed me, and it was really Caleb and JJ that took it away from me, honestly, because of the way that they played, showing the velocity on their throws, and it looked like they were the most ready to step into the role. And even though JJ might not have been declared the starter, it might have been Sam Darnold's job anyway, I was still, really looking forward to see how he performed at this level. Maybe not against all the starters for the Las Vegas Raiders, but regardless of that, there was a lot of questions about JJ coming into this year, coming in as a rookie, a highly drafted rookie, obviously as a quarterback in that first round, whether or not he was going to be able to carry over the success that he had in Michigan, because, all the narratives around JJ were that that team was stacked, that they were a powerhouse with a great offensive line, a fantastic defense. All they did was run the ball, and all JJ had to do was hand the ball off, right? And I was really looking forward to him coming out here, proving some people wrong, and it looked like it was sort of trending that way, the way he came out in his first game against the Raiders. You saw how he finished. He was 11 for 17 with 188 yards and 2 touchdowns on 2 very impressive throws. The first one, the deep ball down the left sideline, and also the second one, a crossing route towards the right side of the field. And not to say that that was all I needed to know to already enshrine J.J. McCarthy as a Hall of Famer, but again, with all the doubts that he had, the grind and the hard work that he had to put in, leading up to the draft, he was one of the only quarterbacks to participate in the combine, then also working out at his pro day and, doing all the extra stuff to make sure that his stock was rising. And you saw how people, scouts, coaches, were all pretty impressed with what they saw. And now it looked like after his first game, like, oh, maybe there could be something there with Sam Darnold. Not to say that Sam played awful or has been playing awful. He's actually been playing pretty decent throughout training camp. But this made you think a little bit that maybe JJ has a shot here. Maybe JJ could challenge Sam even more than we originally thought for this quarterback spot for the Vikings, because it would have been so exciting with all the weapons that the Vikings have at their disposal with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones as well. Their offensive line also is a pretty solid overall. It was a perfect situation for a guy like JJ to come in, but we're not going to see it. Ultimately, this decision for him to be out the entirety of the 2024 season basically came down to that diagnosis after the first game of the preseason. He was diagnosed later with that torn meniscus after reporting it to the team trainers and the team overall that he was experiencing some soreness. He was sat out of practice that following day. Then they had a better look at him and they diagnosed him with that torn meniscus. And that way, there was a decision to be made, a pretty important one, right? Because you have a lot of things hanging in the balance, right? You have missing out your entire year, which is just a gut punch overall for a guy like JJ, or you could take the surgery potentially. You're going to take the surgery overall, actually. You're going to take the surgery, but are we going to trim the meniscus and, have you potentially come back a little sooner, or completely repair it, and you could be better off in the long term, but of course you're going to miss the entire year. The decision was made, obviously, earlier today. Once he went into surgery, they decided to repair his entire meniscus, and that's why he is now out for the entirety of the 2024 year. And, of course, it's a shame because he was going to start getting some more first-team reps this upcoming week. And Kevin O'Connell actually said today, I think they were in Cleveland now because of their joint practice with the Cleveland Browns, that already in this short period of time, he said he was happy with what he saw from J.J. McCarthy. He liked the benchmarks that he was reaching already at this pace, and all of that wrapped into this situation now. It's unfortunate now if you think going forward also, how is this going to affect J.J., because he's going to miss his rookie year, but really his second year is going to be like his rookie year, and at that point, what is he going to look like after having a whole year off from football? Yeah, he might learn it mentally. He might learn the playbook and learn all that other stuff off of the field. But how is he going to adapt to, playing at this level a whole year after taking off with recovering from that knee surgery? That's something I am curious about, how JJ, stays involved and how prepared he looks coming into next year. Potentially, if Sam Darnold is still here or if it goes terribly wrong, are they going to need him right away? And is that pressure going to be too much for him after taking a whole year off from football? There's a lot of things here that, I'm just sort of spitballing here right off the top of my head, thinking of what could go wrong and what could go right in some sense. Maybe Sam Darnold does an all right job and you can ease JJ back into it, which would be probably the most ideal way to do it, but you don't know. You don't know what Sam Darnold is going to do. And I thought that this competition aspect was going to get the best out of Sam Darnold, and it looked like it was doing that through the first couple weeks of training camp. But now, this is obviously Sam Darnold's job now for the entire year, not just the first couple weeks or however long it was going to be. Sam is going to be the starter the entire year, hopefully for the entire year, because if he does play well or bad, that's going to be a huge determinant of that. And now, talking about that, at least you don't have to have it in sort of a limbo state where you don't really know for sure. He's going to play in the first game against the New York Giants, and now you could really at least fully prepare with Sam Darnold, knowing that he's going to be the guy for the entirety of 2024. And that way, I guess you could, it takes some of the curiosity out of it, the questioning out of it. But overall, it is a shame. I don't like that this happened to JJ. I thought it was a good opportunity, like I said again, to prove all those people wrong, that he was just more capable of being an all-around quarterback rather than, just riding the coattails of a very talented Michigan team. He looked like one of the more prepared and more mentally sound quarterbacks in this year's draft, and I thought that was going to take him pretty far, but now, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a whole year to see where he's at, and you think he's going to be behind, and that's going to be a big question, obviously. The main question, how far behind Izzy, or is he just going to fall right in stride with where he should be? That's going to be the most interesting thing about all of this and what the Vikings team looks like a year from now as well. So it's a shame overall, but it is what it is now. The Vikings felt that this was the best case scenario for JJ to have the most longevity and the most health going forward and not have to deal with this knee, just going forward right out of the gate of his NFL career. So, it stinks, but we'll see. I think the Vikings are talented enough still to be pretty decent, but, their chances to me still take a little bit of a hit now. Unfortunately, today also, just to wrap this segment up, their second-year receiver, Jayden Reed, was actually carted off the field today. I don't know the severity or the diagnosis of what the injury was, but it just seems like the Vikings can't catch a break at this point. Hawkinson's still hurt. Jayden Reed now gets hurt. JJ's out for the whole year. Bad Wednesday for the Minnesota Vikings, but that is all pretty much on JJ McCarthy. He will be out the entire 2024 season, but with that being the case, we will move on with our second segment, not before we take our first break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about that question. Are wide receivers starting to become a little bit overvalued in the NFL for a plethora of reasons that I'm going to bring up in that segment, and also bringing up what Matt LaFleur said about having a number one wide receiver and why that doesn't suit their team based on the guys that they have in-house. We're going to get to that right after this first break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss a more open-ended question that I wanted to bring up on today's show. A lot of receiver talk, obviously, over the last just couple weeks, just mainly about Brandon Ayuk, but also you look at the entire offseason, it's been all about the extensions to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, the list goes on and on. And now I started to think, still trying to figure out how complicated this situation is with Brandon Ayuk and how much he deserves to be paid because he is looked upon as a true elite number one receiver, or at least that's the case in a lot of discussions that people are having all over social media and just in general. It made me think of this question. Is having, are wide receivers becoming overvalued in the NFL, or really is having a number one elite bona fide wide receiver becoming overvalued, overhyped across the entire NFL? Because I think overall, when you look at good teams, one of the first things you think of now is, who are their playmakers? Who are the guys that are putting up the points? Who's their quarterback? Obviously is the first thing, but after that, who is their running partner? Who is the Robin to this Batman of a quarterback that a lot are, or not a lot, but that all great teams have, obviously. And you think of the great wide receivers, and you think that has to be right away a certainty, a guarantee for these great teams to be considered great, to be considered actual contenders. But what Matt LaFleur said recently about having a number one wide receiver caught my eye and made me start thinking about this question that I wanted to bring up to you guys. And Matt LaFleur, basically over his time in Green Bay, has seen nothing but success, honestly. You can point to Aaron Rodgers, you can point to Davante Adams as being the main reasons why, and you wouldn't be too far off. But from 2019, when he took the job, to 2021, you had Aaron Rodgers winning back-to-back MVPs in 2020 and 2021. And also, if you look at Davante Adams during that time, during the first 3 years with Matt LaFleur, he went to 3 straight Pro Bowls. He was named to 2 first-team All-Pros, again in 2020 and in 2021. And Matt LaFleur and the Green Bay Packers became the first team in NFL history to win at least 13 games in each of their 3 years in a row to start a new tenure for a head coach. So that already was the main idea for the success of Matt LaFleur. But obviously those 2 guys move on, and now it's a completely different offense that you see traditionally from those contenders, like I mentioned, a great quarterback, which the Packers do have in Jordan Love. Thankfully, it all worked out like that. But the wide receiver, the elite number 1 wide receiver, is not something that you could describe the Green Bay Packers of really having, based on the common criteria of having one guy that stands above all. Because after last year, after Jordan Love, became the revelation, the receivers and how, they managed to have all this success was really pointed out, and they're really running a committee or a group approach with their wide receivers. Not one elite star, but a bunch of guys that are very good. And there's 4 guys that stand out, obviously, with Romeo Doubs, Jayden Reed, Christian Watson, and Dontayvion Wicks seem to be like the main 4 guys that the Packers thrive off of to produce the success that they had last year. And in a way that they prove that having a bunch of wide receivers like this, maybe not having one that stands out, works in a way that they were just a few plays away from reaching the NFC Championship game in a way that is a little unorthodox to a lot of how these other teams are built up of. Having that great wide receiver, that great quarterback, and thinking that's enough to win you games. And to be fair, for a lot of teams, I think that is a way of going about it, but the whole question revolves around, is that the only way of doing it? Is it being overvalued where that's the only way of doing it? I think that's where I start to have some doubts. And Matt LaFleur also didn't really like hearing the idea of having a number 1 wide receiver because also it seems like he thinks it's a little bit overhyped and a little bit overused, just based on his comments that he provided recently on the whole topic. He said, "I want to vomit every time I hear number 1 receiver. It drives me crazy. That's something you guys talk about. I think we've got a bunch of them. I think the beauty of them is they're capable of doing many things, especially those, I would say, top 4 guys. They're capable of being a number 1 in some capacity." And based off of these comments, he had some more, and he said that it basically just depends on the opponent, their method of attack that given week, and also it could just change week to week. That's the beauty of having multiple good wide receivers. In his mind, a bunch of number 1s, because it gives you more versatility. You have a lot of ways of game planning, not just having the opposition know that you're going to this guy 8 times a game and you're going to try and win that way. Having a bunch of guys that can provide for you any given week does have its virtues, but also I guess you could say it's negatives, because at some point in time, you're going to have to pick on which guy you're going to have to go to. A lot of the times it depends on scheme, and sometimes you have to throw scheme out the window and know that your guy, your elite top 3, top 5 wide receiver is better than anybody on the defensive side of the ball, and just giving him a chance, that oftentimes ends up being the case. The Green Bay Packers saw it with Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. They're one of the teams that are the perfect example of fitting into this description of having the best of both worlds, and now they're finding success with both of them. Now in this other method of having various wide receivers, I think the Packers are showing that, you don't necessarily need to have that, because you also look across the NFL at some of the better teams in the entire league, obviously. I think you can point to the 49ers. They have some elite weapons at their disposal, so they don't really apply. You look at the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, that one doesn't apply. The Eagles with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, again, not the best examples, but the ones I wanted to point out in reality are the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. Those two are the best examples that I can provide as of right now. Actually, before I do that, we do have some breaking news. I love when this happens. All right. Unfortunately, it's not the news we all wanted to hear. It's not the Brandon Ayuk news. It's another trade that actually just happened. The Patriots are trading four-time Pro Bowl edge rusher Matthew Judon to the Atlanta Falcons in exchange for just a 2025 third-round pick. Not too bad of a trade. I really wish it was the Brandon Ayuk trade, but Matthew Judon going to the Atlanta Falcons, exactly what they need. It's exactly what I've been harping on for the last couple of days, talking about them, and one of their biggest questions is that edge pressure. Now they get Matthew Judon, exactly what they need, and the Patriots, get to just move on from that awkward situation. So I think it's a good trade. Basically, for the age that Matthew Judon is heading into now, for the Patriots to just get back a third-round pick, I don't think it's too bad either. And again, it just gets this whole situation out of the way. I think it's a great trade for both teams. The Patriots now really going into this full rebuild mode and moving on from one of their more experienced guys and really embracing all the new pieces in 2024. But now that that's out of the way, back onto this topic. Talking about the two teams that I really wanted to mention. You look at the Ravens and the Chiefs as the best examples of what I'm trying to prove is that the Ravens and the Chiefs obviously making it to the conference championship, and you don't really look at the Ravens or the Chiefs, especially last year, as having that elite number one wide receiver. The Ravens have some good ones. Zay Flowers, he was only a rookie though. Mark Andrews is a great tight end, but not necessarily that number one wide receiving option that the Lions have, that the Eagles have, that the 49ers have, right? And regardless of that, they made it to the conference championship. And likewise with the Kansas City Chiefs. The receivers were awful last year. That's just the matter of fact. The only one that really started to break away was Rashee Rice. And again, he was only a rookie, so not the elite wide receiver that they used to have with Tyreek Hill. And they're another example, sort of. They're another example, sort of, just because they have Patrick Mahomes. They've had that elite receiver, and now they just won the Super Bowl with a group of all-right receivers, but it kind of gets negated just because they have Patrick Mahomes. That's the outlier. That's something that obviously nobody can apply, but it still applies somewhat to my point that I'm trying to make, right? That you don't need that elite wide receiver at this point in time, and I think it is starting to become just a little overvalued because I think now when teams have these great wide receivers, a lot of the times when they're asking for these massive contracts, a lot of the teams will just, apply it and, just say, all right, let's pay them without really considering that there might be other spots on their team that they have to figure out. And in just talking about in reality here, that wide receiver that is trying to get market value might not be worth it just based upon the fact that in some people's opinion, they are not elite wide receivers, but because the market is so, inflated right now and you're giving a lot of money away to these wide receivers, to some that definitely do deserve it, like Justin Jefferson and those guys that I mentioned before. But some other receivers, the price is being driven up, and I don't think teams should fall into the trap of overvaluing them and then just giving them these contracts if they're not 100% sure. Really, in my opinion, if I was to build a team that is trying to be a contender and going through a to-do list of what I would want to have on my team, obviously quarterback is the most important, but then after that, I would look at other spots before I really try and get a guy, a CeeDee Lamb, a Justin Jefferson kind of guy. I would look at offensive line, defensive line, pass rushers especially, and really, you look, if you want to talk about other external factors, coaching and scheme and play calling and all of that stuff, to me is a little bit more pivotal to wide receivers, because in general, wide receiver is such a dependent position that you need about 2 to 3 things to happen before that wide receiver can actually get the ball in his hands. You look at the play, needs to be right. The timing and all needs to be right. The wide receiver needs to actually get open. The quarterback needs to see him get open. The offensive line needs to protect enough time for this entire play to get through. And then if one of those things usually goes wrong, the wide receiver is almost taken out of that play and almost taken out of the game if these other factors aren't in line with everything. So in that way, to me, my number 2 priority wouldn't be so much a wide receiver, but more so an edge rusher, because I believe that edge rushers and offensive linemen, if you have a very good offensive line and a very dominant pass rusher, I feel like those 2 positions can really affect the game on their own in comparison to a dependent wide receiver position. And now that they're getting paid the second highest amount of contracts that are not quarterbacks, I think teams are starting to put the wide receivers right up there as the next thing you need beside a quarterback. And to me, that shouldn't be the case. You just look at the examples across the NFL, and I don't think teams should fall into that trap already right away just because of the market and just because they are becoming sort of the face of the NFL now, because it is becoming more of a pass-friendly offense, a lot of points per game sort of league, that teams shouldn't fall into the trap of just thinking that we need a wide receiver, we need a quarterback, and now we're contenders. You know, there's a lot more that needs to go into it. And if you do happen to have one of these generational wide receivers and you're lucky enough to be in a spot where the rest of your team is all right, then I don't see such a big problem. But overall, if you have a bunch of other things you need to do, maybe consider addressing those spots rather than paying the receiver $33 million right away. I think it's not the end of the world if you move on from, say, a Brandon Ayuk or a CeeDee Lamb right now, but I feel like the extensions are closer to those guys because they're just asking for it, and that's the way everything's gone this offseason. So we'll see how those situations pan out, but that's just a thought that I had in my mind over the last few days of talking about, or seeing a lot of people talk about, the wide receivers are now becoming right there in line with quarterbacks in terms of necessities for these teams. And I'm thinking to myself that I would probably want to address other spots before getting to wide receiver and making sure that everything else is squared away before I try and get a receiver that I have to pay $34 million per year. But that's just me. I want to know what you guys think. You leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box with the super chat button, or also in the comments section after this video. But regardless of that, we're going to move on. We're going to get to a quick break right now. But on the other side, we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers potentially having 2 rookies start on their offensive line at the start of the season in 2024. It could be a reality just based on the performances we've seen out of their 2 first-round picks. We're going to go into who it is, what positions they play, and the risk that the Steelers possibly run with having 2 young guys on their offensive line right away. That is coming up right after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are now back here on the show to jump into our next segment that we have to talk about regarding the Pittsburgh Steelers, and sort of connected to the breaking news that we had in regards to the Atlanta Falcons trading for Matthew Judon, having that edge pressure in their Week 1 matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kind of connects to this next segment I want to talk about, the Steelers and their offensive line. And now that the Falcons' pass rush has gotten better, Are the Steelers considering starting two rookies on their offensive line? Is that the best way of approaching it now that the Falcons got better in that regard with a very good pass rusher in Matthew Judon, a Pro Bowl level type of pass rusher, and it just didn't work out with the New England Patriots. Clearly, they wanted to fully reset, and they didn't feel like extending Matthew Judon past, this year that his contract was running out was really worth it for them. And it's kind of hard to disagree with that based on where the Patriots are at now. But now Judon gets a new beginning, and he will be facing maybe one of these two rookies in week 1 when the Steelers take on the Falcons. And just diving more into this hypothetical possibility with the Steelers, there was really an intention behind drafting two offensive linemen back-to-back in this year's draft. Their first-round pick, Troy Fautanu, a tackle out of Washington, and in the second round, they followed that up with drafting West Virginia center Zach Frazier, again in that second round, with the plan to eventually start them at some point in time. But that destination could probably be closer than we originally thought, just because, like I mentioned, with Troy Fautanu, a tackle out of Washington, that was one of the weaker points for the Steelers last year, and he technically played left tackle in college, but now the Steelers have really been deploying him at right tackle and are moving their last year's first-round pick, Broderick Jones, over back to his original left tackle spot, and that's how they lined up in their first preseason game against the Houston Texans. And in that game, a welcome to the NFL moment for Troy Fautanu, just because he was going up against Danielle Hunter, probably one of the last guys I would want to have my first reps against in the NFL. But he did get sort of blessed by fire, got introduced to the NFL in the most brutal way of doing it, and he is sort of learning a new position, a complete different spot from the left side that he played mostly in college, now being deployed on the right side. There is some getting used to. He did get beat on a sack in that game against Danielle Hunter, but overall, the Steelers have been pretty much playing him at that spot with the first-team offense, and they've been pretty impressed with what they've seen, at least just based on the reports and what Mike Tomlin has said about Troy Fautanu. But unfortunately, going back to that first game, he was diagnosed with an MCL sprain, which will keep him out of action for the next couple of weeks. Nothing too serious, obviously. It does stink for the Steelers and for Fautanu because of the potential that he had potentially starting, according to reports by Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He reported that the Steelers felt so confident in Troy Fautanu just after a few weeks and one preseason game that it looked like he was going to start right away for them in their first week matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. And to get to that topic, and it was just funny how it all played out, Jerry Dulac actually mentioned it in his report by saying, after 3 weeks of training camp and just one preseason game, they are ready to hand the starting right tackle job over to their number 1 draft choice. They planned to start him in Saturday night's game against the Buffalo Bills, but obviously that's not going to happen now with his MCL sprain. But he continued and said, and leave him there for the start of the regular season until he injured his knee. And if that were to still be the case, if Troy Fautanu recovered in time to still start in week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons, it would be the first time since 2010 that Mike Tomlin would have started outright a rookie on the offensive line. The last time he did it was with the legendary Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Marquise Pouncey, and it's been almost 15 years since that happened, and they clearly feel very highly about Troy Fautanu if they're going to break this little streak that they had for the last 15 years. They must be really impressed by him already making that positional switch. And to go off of that, I mentioned that there's 2 rookies that they could start, and it is funny how the last time they started a rookie on that offensive line that it was Marquise Pouncey, a center, because the other rookie that they could start on the offensive line, now more likely, is the fellow rookie center, Zach Frazier, out of West Virginia. He's also been very impressive in training camp thus far. He got some reps with the second or third team offense, I want to say, in the game against the Texans. And again, he was very impressive in that game as well. But I say more likely now to potentially start because not only did the first team offense, fumble those snaps, Nate Herbig, the center, with the first-team offense. He fumbled that exchange with Justin Fields. They were both at fault for that, but it doesn't look good on either one of those guys, Fields or Nate Herbig. But now, in today's training camp practice, Nate Herbig actually left early with some sort of arm or upper body injury. I don't know the exact diagnosis. I don't know that the Steelers have provided those details, probably until tomorrow. But with him now being injured and not coming off of the hottest performance in the first game of preseason, it's starting to look a little bit more promising for Zach Frazier now. And Mike Tomlin already talked about it and his improvement throughout just this short week of training camp, that he's liked what he's seen from Zach Frazier in camp. He also liked what he saw in the first game of preseason, and he said that his workload with the first team was going to improve or increase just this week with the first team. And that's the case. That has been the case over the last few days. And now it looks like in tomorrow's practice, if Nate Herbig isn't ready to go, Zach Frazier will be in there with the first team in a joint practice with the Buffalo Bills. And what better way, to make an impression in practice than none other than a Bills team that you're very familiar with and facing other competition rather than your teammates. It's a great way and a good opportunity for Zach to go out there and prove that he deserves to be out there as the starting center. And I don't know if I would say that definitely guarantees that he's going to start, but it's a great opportunity to not only do that, but if Nate Herbig can't go over the weekend against the Bills on Saturday, then Zach Frazier, again, has another opportunity to go out there, regardless if it's with Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. He has an opportunity to go out there with the first team and press again over the weekend, and that way maybe start making this possibility into a reality with not only starting Troy Fautanu, but also having Zach Frazier in there as potentially starting as well. But obviously that all sounds great. By drafting two guys in the first two rounds that are going to be starters right away, that means, that your draft plans, your scouting has been very good if you feel this great about them at this point in time. But the risk you run, obviously, isn't ideal. In the first game, I was going to come on here and mention how the Falcons, their edge pressure isn't that great, so maybe Fautanu, it wouldn't be too much of a challenge in the first week just compared to going up against Danielle Hunter. It wasn't going to be the same against the Falcons, but now that everything has just changed in the matter of half an hour, now they have Matthew Judon coming in there, and depending on which side he lines up on, he could be facing a rookie in week one, and that could be a bigger challenge and a bigger risk for the Steelers, obviously having a rookie out there against one of the better pass rushers over the last 3 years. And also for Zach Frazier, if he does start, one of the best pass rushers that the Falcons have is Grady Jarrett right there in the middle. And again, if he does start, not great matchups on paper for two guys that are just starting their NFL careers. But if the Steelers, overall with my thoughts on this, if the Steelers really feel that starting two rookies, Frazier and Fautanu, at these two spots, give them their best opportunity to execute Arthur Smith's offense and just win overall in week one, honestly, I don't see a problem with doing it. I'm just all for who the Steelers as evaluators feel are the two best to go out there and win games. If they feel it's two rookies, then it's two rookies. I have no problem with it, but I don't want it to be just these rookies just for the sake of, you drafted two great players and you just want to start them right away. I don't think they should rush the process of developing these two guys because they do have promising futures. At least it seems like it already here at the start. But if they're able to make up that ground and impress the rest of the time leading up to the regular season game against the Falcons, then, if that's the case, I don't really feel too bad about it. If they do start, I don't think that's a big liability. Of course, it will be on paper for anybody that might not see the development of these two guys, but I'm going to be watching, I'm going to be seeing if these two guys are really that level of, starter level over the next couple preseason games, over the next training camp practices, and see how good they, become leading up into that week one game. And right now, based on just all these developments, Nate Herbig getting hurt today, I was going to say that I could see one of them starting, but really now it seems like both of them could actually have a great chance of starting. We're still going to have to wait and see how Fautanu recovers from that MCL sprain, but it shouldn't be too serious. They only said a couple of weeks, and the first game is not until like 24 days or 25 days from now, so he's going to have a window to potentially be in there and recover fully, so we'll see. You know what's funny about the Steelers this year? It's been the fact that they're doing everything that the Steelers traditionally don't do. This year, been uber aggressive in trades and their draft strategy and things like that, and just moving around all these pieces, getting rid of their entire quarterback room, and now they follow suit by maybe starting 2 rookies. It's very un-Steeler-like, but also it fits exactly what they've been doing just this season, and all credit to Omar Khan for sort of starting this revolution. I love it. I love that it's keeping me on my toes, but I don't know. The risk is there. They got Matthew Judon. Who am I to question Mike Tomlin? But I still would be a little nervous watching that game. But I am excited for Fautanu and Zach Frazier. Zach Frazier, a fellow Mountaineer. I would love to see him start. That would be awesome. But we'll see. We'll see what the final decision is on these 2 guys. But regardless of that, that'll do it for that segment. We're going to go into our next break, and when we return, 2 more topics to talk about, continuing our series on the biggest questions across the NFL, this time stopping in the AFC East, talking about all those teams and what questions they still have to answer in leading up to their Week 1 matchup in the regular season, and also talking about Titans quarterback Will Levis. He talked about the difference in this Titans team, and also what are the expectations that I have for Will Levis heading into his second year in the NFL. That is coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me back here on the show to jump into our continued series over the last few days, talking over each division and going through each of the teams in those divisions on answering my biggest question with each roster and how they've progressed, what they've addressed, and what they still need to address heading into 2024. And this time, we're talking about the AFC East. A lot going in there, a lot of questions, and yeah, it's just basically an interesting division just compared to last year and all the changes that we've seen and that we are expected to see going into this year. So we're going to start off with one of the more polarizing, one of the more questioned, and just a lot of expectations on the New York Jets that I wanted to start off with. And it pretty much just writes itself with the question, how quickly can they just get Hassan Reddick on the field? At this point, getting him near the facility would be a win for this New York Jets team because of how everything's developed and how everything has sort of crumbled for the Jets at this point, because you traded for this guy 4 months ago, but now you still haven't gotten one of the better pass rushers on your team on the field practicing with this new squad because of a contract dispute that both sides can't seem to agree on at any point over the last few months that this has been going on. And, I'm really interested to see what's the Jets' timeline and sort of deadline with how far they'll go, how far they'll wait before, it comes to a point where I think they should go and start thinking about, just getting it over with, honestly, because there's so much pressure on this team. Obviously, like I talked about, I think yesterday or Monday, how, you don't have time to mess around right now. You don't have time to sit on your high horse and think like, oh, who is Hassan Reddick? Who does he think he is talking to the Jets? Like, we're just gonna, give in to his contract demands. They're not anywhere near that situation to kind of, hold their head above the request from Hassan Reddick. He, maybe last year wasn't his best year, but before that why he earned this new contract with the Philadelphia Eagles a few years ago was because he was one of the better pass rushers, and he can add a lot to this already impressive defense. I think the Jets just need to come to a, compromise with Hassan Reddick and meet with him again. And if he truly won't show up until he has a new contract, then I don't see really the big deal in just going over with him and coming to that compromise, like I said, and just getting him back on the team and back with this team, because everything that anybody ever talks about with the Jets is not related to football, it seems. It's always about Rodgers and what he's doing off the field, what he says, the disputes that they have between teammates, Hassan Reddick not being on the field, and nobody talks about how they're getting actually better on the football field overall. So to just put this to bed and focus on football for the New York Jets, I think will be a win. And that's something that they have to do as soon as possible, in my opinion, for them to just get it out of the way, to stop having all these extra narratives around their team and just focus on football. But that's the New York Jets. The next team is the reigning divisional champs, the Buffalo Bills. All the talk about their number one option, could it not actually be a wide receiver, but will Dalton Kincaid, their second-year tight end, become the go-to option for Josh Allen? Because you look at Dalton Kincaid last year, and as a rookie, he was second on the team in targets, second in receptions, but he only had 2 touchdowns, which was the only downside of it. But you get rid of Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs, which accounted for 240 targets and over 1,800 receiving yards, and you take that completely away. Now you have a bunch of unknowns with this receiver room. You bring in Curtis Samuel, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, you draft Keon Coleman, you still have Khalil Shakir, but it's nothing that Josh Allen really has any prior real chemistry with, not to the level of Stephon Diggs. And it looked like last year, the way that this chemistry was building with Dalton Kincaid and just how impressive he was right out of the gate as a rookie. Now that you have all these extra receptions, targets, and just yards basically sitting out there, of course a lot of it's going to go to the wide receivers, ideally, to make this Buffalo Bills team, a very good team. But I feel like a lot of it could go to Dalton Kincaid, and I don't think it would be too foreign to maybe start thinking of Dalton Kincaid as being in a position that you base your team around him and trying to get him the ball as much as possible. And I'm not comparing him to Travis Kelce already, but, it has worked for the Kansas City Chiefs with Kelce and maybe not having the stars around him at receiver. But the Chiefs have done pretty well for themselves, and I think the closest thing that you can get to Patrick Mahomes, obviously being the biggest outlier in all of this, could be Josh Allen and all the battles that they've had, how close Josh Allen has gotten to beat Patrick Mahomes, maybe copying their script a little bit with having a great tight end and just having all right receivers around them could be the way to go for the Buffalo Bills. And Kincaid has already that trust with Josh Allen. He is one of the guys that is there over the course of just from last year to this year, so you already have that chemistry there with him, and it makes sense to lean on him just because they want to use the run game a little bit more. I think that's a big emphasis for their new offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, from last year when he took the job. It seems like they want to get James Cook more involved in that way. Not only can you take advantage of Josh Allen's legs and running ability, but off of the play action, off of the heavy sets that you're lined up with, Dalton Kincaid could really be set up to be successful for this offense, and I don't think it should be ruled out or scuffed at that Dalton Kincaid could be the number one wide receiver or just receiving option for this team. I think it's a good alternative in kind of switching it around from the typical having to be a wide receiver, your go-to guy. Dalton Kincaid is definitely talented enough. He already had a bunch of receptions and targets last year. To build off of that, getting better from last year to this year, I think it's a very viable option, and I think it is very likely to happen for the Buffalo Bills. But moving on to the next team, in saying that, we're going to go to the Miami Dolphins. Close to winning the division, they choked it away, losing to the Buffalo Bills, but now they improved a little bit on defense. But what will that defense actually look like with all of these changes, being brought up just this year? They did lose some of their biggest guys like Xavier Howard, Christian Wilkins, Alex Van Ginkel, Jerome Baker, Raekwon Davis, a lot of their main pieces and cornerstones of their defense, but they did bring in some guys that I thought were able to replace, to some extent, some of the pieces that they lost in Jordan Brooks, Chop Robinson that they drafted, Jordan Poyer adding some experience back there, Kendall Fuller in the secondary, Neville Gallimore along that defensive line, and Anthony Walker as well, to go along with the potential returns, or the eventual returns, I should say, of Bradley Chubb on that edge and Jalen Phillips making his way back from that Achilles injury. And, you know, the injuries are the biggest thing with this team, but now that they're incorporating new pieces into this defense, it looks like the offense isn't going to be a problem. You know, they still have arguably one of the more explosive offenses in the NFL. So it really comes down to this defense, how they all acclimate to each other, how they all get on the same page. And if they are all playing cohesively, you get Chubb and Jalen Phillips fully recovered from their injuries, you don't have to be a top 5, top 3 defense, but you have to have timely stops. You have to be almost like a clutch defense, for a lack of a better terms, to just make the stops that you need to make. If you give up 20 points, 21 points, this Miami Dolphins offense is capable of putting up at least 24 each game. I'm very confident in saying that. So knowing that that offense has that potential, if you could just make 1 or 2 stops when you have to do it, I think that'll be enough, and it'll improve this Dolphins team in 2024 and maybe get them over the hump and win this division. I think they're not being given enough credit to win this division. That's just me. I like the pieces that they added, and I think they have a good team. So if they could figure out this defense sooner rather than later, it'll go a long way for them and hopefully winning this division this year while they were so close last year. And then the last team I wanted to get to, obviously, is the New England Patriots, and more of a just general thought with them. What sort of, positives, what sort of good things can you build upon this year to just take with you next year? Because I don't think it's dissing the Patriots in any way to expect them to just not be very good at all this year. They could be in that conversation to potentially be a bottom 3 team in regards to the NFL draft and where they're selecting. That's just the way it is right now. That's probably what all teams have to go through when you're going through a full rebuild. Getting rid of the general manager, head coach, bringing in a bunch of new players, young players, and establishing what Gerard Mayo wants to be a new culture, a new identity with this team, doing it his way, and, still having those Patriot mannerisms. What sort of positives can you take away in a lot of bad losses potentially, but what silver lining, what positive things can you take from week to week, and maybe just from month to month, and then growing on that after this year? Hopefully they keep Gerard Mayo, not just for 1 year, because that wouldn't be fair at all with the team that he has. So hopefully they keep Gerard Mayo around. Hopefully they can find some positives and build upon that, show some improvement here or there. Again, not having to win 8, 9 games or anything like that, but being a team that wins 4 games, 5 games, and are still competitive, finding the positives in all of that, and being able to carry that on to next year, because they do have some exciting parts already to this team, to their credit. Kyle Duggar, Jabril Peppers, Christian Gonzalez, Josh Uche, and then on the offensive side, their wide receivers have been looking good just based on the reports in training camp. They have something to carry on to already into next year. Finding some more positives that you were just not expecting this year could go a long way, and I'm excited to see that. Again, they're probably not going to be in the race for a division or a playoff spot or anything like that, but it's a long game for the Patriots that they're playing now. They're not the dynasty that we are so accustomed to seeing, but, that's all right. Some things come to an end, and the Patriots are just at that stage of their progression. They have to pick themselves up and start all over. So I'm excited to see it. I like what Gerard Mayo's doing, and if they could do that, I have confidence in them over the next 2 to 3 years that they could get back to being pretty competitive in the AFC. But that's pretty much it. That's the AFC East. Some of the questions I have for these teams in this division. But we have one more topic to talk about, just briefly going over what Will Levis said on this new look Titans team and the expectations that I have for Will Levis to get this Titans team to a place where I expect them to be based on all the changes that they made this offseason. We're going to get to that quickly after this quick break. Thank you for joining me back here on the show to go over a last segment here on today's episode, talking about one of the teams that I'm silently rooting for, that a team that I'm quietly excited for also in 2024, and just really overall this entire division, which the Tennessee Titans find themselves in now, with how the Texans have improved, how the Titans have improved, the Jacksonville Jaguars still pretty decent and incorporating some new pieces around their squad, and even the Indianapolis Colts as well, adding some more important pieces to their offense, getting back Anthony Richardson. I wanted to focus on this Titans team though, and to me, with those new incorporations that I mentioned, they have a new head coach, Brian Callahan. They have no more Derrick Henry, so that's obviously a big change to their roster, but also the philosophy that they're going to try to incorporate. Also, bringing in L'Jarius Sneed, I thought was huge. Tyler Boyd, Calvin Ridley, Chidobe Awuzie, Jamal Adams, and Quandre Diggs, just to name a couple. They also added some pieces to their offensive line. So, this team really is going to look different. They have a lot more household names, I think, that really are just going to draw more people in and want to see what this Titans team could look like in 2024. I'm excited for it, because of that change of philosophy that I mentioned, with not having Derrick Henry and bringing in Brian Callahan, used to having an offense that's more spread out, having all these options in the receiving game in his time with Cincinnati with Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. He does bring over Tyler Boyd, and now he has Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, so I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see how different the Titans are, and it's a big stop here. It's a big thing that is into consideration. The missing piece that is going to connect everything, the hub that makes everything flow, is going to be ultimately the quarterback. Obviously, the most important position in the NFL, and the responsibility of carrying these expectations, carrying the way that this looks, the execution, is going to fall on Will Levis. Entering only his second year in the NFL, will have more pressure on himself just overall based on the position that he plays. But I think this excitement that now is built in to the Tennessee Titans right away with all the changes that they've brought, not just for me, I'm not the only one saying it, but according to CBS, some Tennessee Titans fans have claimed that this season has been the most exciting one in the franchise's history, just again based on everybody that they brought in. A lot of people are buying into the Tennessee Titans. Again, not just the fans, not just me coming on here and boasting about it. I think if you're not paying attention to the Titans, they will give you a reason to, but it has to be because of Will Levis. He has to be the one that connects everything, that really runs the show like most well-executed, well-run teams do. And is he ready for that? Are the expectations, there to be met for Will Levis, just entering his second year in a whole new offense, completely different from what Coach Vrabel had this Titans team do last year? Now it's a bit more modern, a bit more open, and potentially could fit Will Levis's skill set a little bit better, so that's a positive, but it doesn't change the fact that he has to learn a whole new playbook and, just learn everything so early on in his NFL career. But like I mentioned before, regarding CBS Sports, Will Levis talked to CBS recently about this new Titans team and just what he expects the changes to be. What changes has he seen already from his first year to this year? And he said, our versatility, I think that our identity as a team is going to be pretty different than what teams have been used to seeing when the Titans play. And also he praised their additions on defense and just how much better they've improved, in his opinion, with their new defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, coming over and challenging this offense each and every day in training camp. So that's also exciting, I think, having those battles, iron sharpening iron, like everybody says. It shows that this Titans team, I think, has a lot more potential and a lot higher of a ceiling than in recent years, because in reality, last year and really years before that, nobody was talking about the Titans, honestly, a lot heading into any year. It was probably going to be more of the same. You knew Derrick Henry was going to get the ball 30 times a game. It was going to be low scoring. Their defense was going to try and keep them in it. If they make a couple of good throws here or there, they were going to have a good chance of winning. And with the NFL shifting so much, trying to be more modern and high scoring and everything like that, yeah, it was something different, but it fit what they wanted to do. And going along that style, going with that method, it didn't usually pan out as they would have wanted it to. Of course, now I believe that they're a lot more talented and based on the players that they have, but just off of last year, the expectations weren't really there for the Titans, whereas now I feel like it's 180 degrees different heading into this year. And you look at just the circumstances and the idea with the Titans, just based on what I said, their over-under record this year was set at 6.5. And that, I think, says a lot because it goes into those expectations that I think were lacking for the Tennessee Titans. And it might show that a lot of people are still not buying in, but I truly believe that they're going to be pretty special and pretty competitive this year. So if you're a betting person and you want to take that, I would definitely take the over on that. Only 3 teams have longer Super Bowl odds than the Titans, and I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl, but it seems like an easy bet to win at 6.5 over-under mark for this Titans team that is just astronomically better. But again, I sound like I'm getting ahead of myself, but I do want to emphasize that the biggest thing is going to be Will Levis. And at this point, talking about the pressure, not just from the fans, saying this is the most exciting offseason in the entire franchise's history, Will Levis has obviously heard it, but in reality, he only has one goal in mind. And he said, based on that, he said, I'm not going to look at stats. I'm not going to look at record. I just think I want to turn the tape on and see myself doing the right, boring things on a consistent basis. I think that's how quarterbacks play in this league for the longest time, is they never get bored with doing the boring things. And pretty interesting way of putting it, but how I interpret it is, just doing the fundamentals right, going on each and every week, turning on the tape and knowing that you're improving, doing all of the little things right, I think is what Will Levis wants to do and focus upon this year because, again, he's still super young. I am putting these expectations on him already as the most important piece, obviously, but I think that just comes with the territory. You are playing quarterback, and yeah, he's super young, but I think this team is inching closer and closer to a win-now mode, and we're obviously going to see some weaknesses, some deficiencies this year. It's going to come with, building this new team. But for right now, based on what they have on paper, looking at it and projecting like everybody does in sports, I think they are in a good spot to do it because you look at Will Levis's performance in 2023. He was 5th in yards among rookies with just over 1,800 yards. He was 6th among rookies in touchdowns with 8. He threw 4 interceptions, but all of that was only done in 9 games. So while you had the CJ Strouds go out there and perform very well, CJ obviously played an entire season. And I'm not saying or implying that Will Levis, if he played the entire year, would have been competing with CJ. Different situations, different teams, different talent on each team. So I'm not saying that, but Will Levis, if you give him however many games it was, 8 more games, I think those numbers could have looked a lot more impressive, and he could have been up there at least closer to CJ Stroud, I truly believe, in terms of the numbers, and I think people would have a different opinion on Will Levis at that point in time if he put up, 2,800 yards, 12 touchdowns or something like that over the next 8 games. It would have looked a little bit more comparable to CJ, and I think people would have looked at Will Levis a little bit more prepared than they do right now, of course, because he wasn't the starter right off the bat. But at 6-11 last year, I think they have enough to at least get to 8 games in a tough division. I'm only adding 2 more wins to them to be 8-9, but this is a tough division, and if they could get to 8 games, I think that's the minimum. That's their floor, in my opinion, with how talented they are, and it's going to be very entertaining to watch. I'm very much looking forward to that, but all the other teams, had a winning record. Only the AFC North had all teams above 500, which to me is the best division in the NFL. So this AFC South is sneakily inching closer to that territory of competing with the AFC North for one of the best divisions in the entire NFL. So that goes along, again, with the team that the Titans have built now, and they were the only team to finish under 500, so I don't expect any of the other teams to play dramatically worse. So the Titans, with getting this much better, I believe that they're going to be right in the thick of things with everybody else, and they could be in a very close race heading towards the end of the year and vying for playoff spots with all of these teams potentially. It's not going to be easy by any stretch, but the makeup, the ideology of this team, I think suits them a lot better, fits Will Levis a lot better, which is the most important thing. And talking about stats and expectations for Will Levis just into next year to close this segment out, I think overall for Will Levis, he could push to at least another 1,000 yards added to the 1,800 that he had. Maybe in a perfect world, he gets over 3,000 yards with maybe 14 to 17 touchdowns as well, at least, if he takes that next necessary step in his development. I don't think that's too crazy to say. You know, he was nearly at 2,000 yards in just 2 games. To add another 1,000 over the course of another 8 games, I don't think it's too outlandish to say at this point, because this team has certainly gotten better. They've gotten him more weapons, and from what I've seen and from what I've read in the reports from training camp, it looks like Brian Callahan and this team is pretty satisfied with Will Levis from what they've seen so far. It's a new offense. It's going to take some time. There are going to be some bumps, but in saying all of that, with how this division is also set up, it's a very young division as well. There's not one team just dominating it. It's lined up that way with how the Texans are built, but it's a very young, unpredictable division, and that just makes it more exciting and gives the Titans, I think, more of an opportunity to really compete this year with how they've built this team. But the expectations are there for Will Levis, the expectations to put up those numbers that I mentioned and get this team. They were last year, so if they can finish second in this division and be in competition for the playoffs, I think that's a successful season for Will Levis. I'm expecting him to do that. Let me know if you guys think just crazy for having this level of expectation for Will Levis in just his second year, but I'm really buying into this Titans team. I like seeing them. I like how they built their team, just going all in for these changes. But let me know what you guys think of Will Levis and this Titans team just in general in this year. But with that being said, we're going to wrap up the show with that last segment. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to check out more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, to find a lot more content around the NFL in regards to this show. And lastly, tune in every weekday, as always, at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions and all the latest storylines across the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you again for joining me, and I expect to see you guys back here with me again tomorrow. See you guys later.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that